Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from Group 2, consists of Adi Mufida, Haryandi, and Novega Ferdini. Today we will try to explain about behavior concept from psychology and social psychology and historical perspective. Okay, let's jump to the first discussion, that is attitude. What is attitude? Attitude is learned tendencies to react a consistently favorable or unfavorable manner toward people, objects, ideas, or situations. The term attitude object is used to incorporate all the objects toward which a person might react. Attitude are not behavior, rather, they represent a readiness for action or behavior. Thus, attitude drive and guide behavior. Attitude can be acquired from personal experience, parents, peer, and social groups. Once learned, attitude becomes an established part of individual. Behavior accountant need to know about attitude in order to understand and predict behavior. Next is component of attitude. Uh, First component is cognitive. Cognitive component is made up of ideas, perception, and belief one has about the attitude object. It also refers to the information one has about the attitude object and to the stereotype or generalization, either accurate or inaccurate, one might take. The second is emotional. Emotional or affective components refers to the feeling one has toward the attitude object. Positive feeling include liking, respect, or empathy, and negative feeling includes dislike, fear, or disgust. And the third is behavioral component. It refers to how one may react to the attitude object. For example, if this company computerized, I'm going to quit. Or as soon as new software package is available, I want to learn how to use it. And then function of attitude. There are some function of attitude. The first is understanding. Understanding or knowledge function help the people to meaning or make sense the new event or situation. Attitude allow person to appraise a new situation quickly. And second is need satisfaction. Satisfying function means people will form a positive reaction if the condition or object meets their need. Meanwhile, people will form a negative reaction if the condition or object doesn't meet their need. And the third is ego defensive. Attitude serve ego defensive, changing or developing people to protect from acknowledging basic truth of themselves. For example, attitude can enhance people's self-esteem and allow them to avoid thinking about their own shortcomings by blaming others. Employees who dismiss all negative reviews about their behavior will, with the statement that the supervisor is really crabby, are using attitudes as an ego defensive. And then value expression. People gain satisfaction by expressing themselves through their attitudes. Attitudes may tell the world who a person is and for what a person stands. And then attitude formation and change. Attitude formation refers to developing an attitude toward an object when none existed previously. Attitude change refers to substituting a new attitude for one that was held previously. Attitudes are formed on the basis of psychological, personal, and social factors. The most fundamental way in which attitudes are formed is through direct personal experience with an object. Next is theories of attitude change. There are some theories of attitude change. The first is stimulus response and reinforcement theories. Stimulus response and reinforcement theories of attitude change focus how people respond to particular stimuli. Responses are likely to be repeated if they are rewarded or reinforced. These theories place more emphasis on stimulus component than on the response. Simply, behavioral accountants need to know what is the right stimulus in order to change the people's attitude. The second is social judgment theory. The social judgment theory of attitude change takes a perceptual approach. This theory considers attitude change as resulting from a change in how people perceive an object rather than a change in belief about the object. The theory hold that we can create a small change in individual attitude if we know about the current structure of person's attitude, and if we make the appeal to change in the least threatening manner. An underlying assumption is that an attempt to cause a major change in attitude is likely to fail because the extent of the change will be uncomfortable for the subject. The third is consistency and dissonance theories. Some theories of attitude change assume that the people try to maintain consistency or congruence between their attitudes and behavior. These theories emphasize the importance of people, ideas, and belief. The theories view attitude change as a rational and cognitive process whereby people, when made aware of inconsistencies between attitudes and behavior, will be motivated to correct the inconsistency by changing either the attitude or the behavior. An underlying assumption of such theories is that people cannot tolerate the inconsistencies. And then the fourth theory is self-perception theory. Self-perception theory holds that people develop attitude based on how they observe and interpret their own behavior. According to this theory, attitude change if the behavioral change first. And next is motivation. What is motivations? Motivation is the process of initiating conscious and purposeful action. It is the key of initiating, driving, sustaining, and directing behavior. Motivation is important concept for behavioral accountant because organizational effectiveness depends on people performing as they are expected to perform. As we know, motivation will affect to the job result. High motivation usually result a good output and vice versa. So it's very important to behavioral accountant to know how to improve people motivation. Next is we try to discuss about the theory related to the motivations. It means through their theories it can increase or decrease in motivations. The first theory is the need theory. The theory holds that people are motivated by their desire to satisfy a hierarchically ordered set of needs. First need is basic psychological needs like food, air, and sex. And the second is safety needs like physical and psychological security. The third is social belongingness needs like friendship and love. And the fourth is esteem needs like self-respect, recognition, power, and status. And the last is self-actualization needs like fulfillment of one's potential. People will try to fulfill their needs from the basic until the actualization need. Behavioral accountant need to know which part of need the employees are. Optimize it in order to optimize motivation. The second is expectancy theory. The expectancy theory motivation assumes that the level of motivation perform task depend on the belief one has about the reward structure for the task. In other words, motivation exists when a person expects to receive particular reward for performing a particular task.
Next is perception. Perception is how people see or interpret events, objects, and people. Also can be process by which we select, organize, and interpret stimuli into a meaningful and coherent picture of the world. We know that people act on the basis of their perception regardless of whether those perceptions accurately or inaccurately reflect reality. Managers and behavioral accountants must develop accurate perception of the people with whom they deal. The difference that they perceive between key groups of people may account for successful or unsuccessful operation. For example, a plant manager must develop perception of individual supervisor, major customers, union officers, sales representative, and other managers. Behavioral accountants need to know about perception because the perception that people form develop into the ideas and attitudes that influence behavior. If a potential employee perceives a company's promotion and compensation policy as fair, that person is likely to join the firm and become a satisfied worker. And also, there is a physical stimuli versus individual predisposition. People experience the world differently because perception depends on both physical stimuli and individual predisposition. Physical stimuli itself is our raw sensory inputs such as sight, sound, and touch. And also individual predispositions include motives, need, attitude, past learning, and expectation. Perception differs among people because individual sensory receptors might function differently, but primarily because predisposition differ. Thus, the same company policy will be perceived differently by production workers, middle managers, and the top management. And next is about selection, organization, and interpretation of stimuli. The first one is select. We are only able to perceive a small portion of all the stimuli to which we are exposed. Thus, consciously or unconsciously, we select what we perceive. That is, we concentrate or pick up on some things and ignore others. Usually, we select for perception those things that we find most interesting and important. Second is organize. People organize stimuli into groups and perceive it as an unified whole. If given incomplete information, people will fill in the gaps and then behave as though they had complete information about the situation. And then interpret. Perceptual interpretation depends on past experience and social group membership. When stimuli are ambiguous, for example, people will interpret them in a manner that is consistent with their needs, interests, and attitudes. Next is about relevance of perception for accountants. Behavioral accountants can apply knowledge of perception to many organizational activities. For example, in performance evaluation, the manner in which a person is appraised may be affected by the accuracy of the supervisor perception. Incorrect or biased ratings may result in good performance becoming discouraged and dissatisfied, and ultimately leaving the firm. Therefore, supervisors should recognize that their feelings about certain subordinates may affect their evaluation and should be on guard against this source of perceptual bias. Continue to the material learning. Learning is the process by which new behaviors are acquired. It occurs as the result of motivation, experience, and repetition in response to particular stimuli or situation. This combination of motivation, experience, and repetition occurs in two forms: classical conditioning and operant conditioning. The first one we talk about classical conditioning. Classical conditioning, the relationship between a stimulus and conditioned response. Pavlov, in his experiments, said that first rang a bell, then fed the dog. At first, the dog only salivated when the food was presented, but after repeated treatment, the dog eventually salivated at the sound of the bell. In this case, the bell was followed by a conditioned response. And then operant conditioning. The response brings on the reward. Example, when commanded with the stimulus shake, a dog will respond by extending its paw. The animal responds in this manner because it has learned that this response will bring on a reward. Learning principles have been applied to many organizational objectives. Positive reinforcement and feedback in the form of recognized bonus and other reward have been used to improve productivity, reduce turnover and absenteeism, and make employees more responsive to customer needs. Then the last is personality. Personality refers to the inner physiological characteristics like traits, qualities, and mannerisms that determines and reflect how a person responds to his or her environment. Personality is the essence of individual difference. No two people are alike in terms of personality, but they may be similar in terms of particular personality characteristic. And also, personality tends to be consistent and enduring. A shy individual will likely remain shy, and domineering person will likely remain domineering for long periods of time. For example, an introvert person is likely to be withdrawn and shy and to exhibit non assertive behavior. We would not expect that person to be a force for change in the organization. Personality, however, can change. A major life event, for instance, can cause a change in personality. Behavioral accountants can deal effectively with people if they understand how personality develops and how it can change. The main application of personality theory in organization is in predicting behavior. Personality tests might determine who would be most effective in stressful jobs, who would respond well to criticism, and who first must be praised before being told of undesirable behavior, who is a potential leader, who is likely to work better in participative work environment, and who is likely to be a security risk, and so on.
Well, we are going to talk about assumption about human behavior from a historical perspective. Humans are complex beings. Human behavior is influenced by many factors that can alter the structure of life, and human behavior is a form of adaptation to change. Talking about feudalism, we can define it as a social relationship based on status obtained from the offspring. For example, one's position in society depends on their family status, where he was born, and their age. A girl or a union arranged according to their own agreement in this feudalism system, where the regulation involves the members of their own and their influence on social relations. So it means a person cannot choose their own lives because of the influence of this feudal system. The rise of industrial society it started in 1776 by James Watt with the Industrial Revolution, while at the time the company used a large amount of labor which is used to operate nations that are controlled by inanimate power. One of the more important incidents was the enclosure movement in England. Thus, the enclosure movement transferred the serf who remained on the land into peasant and the serf who left the land into a free, mobile, propertyless labor class that are the guilds of the former power. Another major change was the development of a new middle class. Merchants now stood between producers and consumers. The rise of this entrepreneurial class was also necessary for the development of capitalism. Next, we will talk about capitalism versus feudalism. What is the difference between both of them? Feudalism stressed tradition. Capitalism was not traditional. In feudalism, there was social equality within a social class but not across classes. Capitalism did not stress equality. The child of an innkeeper had the same opportunity as the child of a baron to be successful at work. Capitalism stressed equality of full opportunity. The notion of social justice was the basis of economic rigor in medieval Europe. In capitalism, there was no such notion. Instead, there was the idea of free wages. We pay jobs, not people. Factory life and discipline it demanded was new for workers who were used to traditional society where they were more or less their own boss. There was also the notion of a just price in feudalism. Capitalism substitutes competitive wages, the lowest wage that would maximize profit. Capitalism stressed compulsion and a duty to work hard. An important motive of capitalism was the duty to accumulate wealth. Economists say the rise of the market brought all this about. The behavioral view takes into account the rise of the capitalist spirit. This is the idea that a person should pursue gains for its own end and should rationalize everything in life. The behavioral view provides an important link, that is, a value system that would be compatible with capitalism. The value system answers a question that has no rational explanation. Why do people work so hard when they have so much? Protestant theology was applied to the economic sphere by making hard and diligent work that is called noble. The emphasis in capitalism on the accumulation of wealth also had its roots in these religious doctrines. In summary, the Protestant ethic contributed to the development of capitalism by providing the motivation toward work and entrepreneurship. It also provided the type of people needed for capitalism, such as honest, sober, impersonal, and rational. As capitalism became more formal and institutionalized, it depends less on religious motivation and looked to utilitarian and pecuniary motivation. Well, we are going to talk about perspective in the world, or in our books you can read about perspective on workers. By the late 1920s and early 1930s, managers came to believe that it was more important to explain workers' attitudes and behavior than to engage in moral condemnation. Managers come to recognize that people work for things other than money. Workers become a conglomerate of traits that could be measured and identified. There was a shift from looking at workers' action to looking at their feelings and attitudes. Job classification system and attitude tests were developed during this period. Workers' needs were recognized. Following the human relation movement in the 1930s, jobs were enlarged and rotated. When possible, worker was made less routine and in some industry workers were asked to participate in some organizational decision-making. Assumption about human behavior. Both classical economists and classical management theorists assumed that the primary goal of business activity was profit maximization and that organization members were motivated primarily by economic factors. So that this implies an accounting system to be useful to modern business organization, it must report more than just financial data. It must be an inclusive management information system. The accountant who designed the system must be aware of the complex nature of organizational goals and the social, psychological, economic factors that affect human behavior. Okay, that's all our presentation for today. Thank you for your attention, and if you have any question, please let us know. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.